Okay, we're going to take a look at Eve Browning Cole's critique of Cartesian dualism. Important to remember here Descartes' position of and arguments for dualism, which sees the mind and body as radically distinct entities, two separate things. Um, Cole is critiquing that here. So let me kind of just jump into it here. Um, So here we're first asked why philosophers have been uncomfortable with the body. It looks like the body is a much more limited thing than the mind. I mean, in the mind, we seem to be unfettered by the limits of physicality, time, and place. We can go anywhere and be truly free and expansive and unlimited in the mind. So it seems like the kind of better, superior part of a man, a person, but she's kind of going to be saying, well, it's been reserved for the man. Um, so here we go. She's now kind of getting into the criticism of that view and a lot of the other things that we associate with Descartes. She thinks it's just a kind of an artificial setup from the beginning. If you remember, he kind of removes himself from any kind of normal, embodied in the world activity and just meditates as this solitary, lonesome thinker, and um, goes about to seek out knowledge in this very unusual, she says, atypical kind of context. Usually, when people seek knowledge, you're part of some kind of knowledge seeking group or community or project, and you're in an actual world with other people, part of a common project of trying to find something out. She talks about like maybe archaeologists or a research team. Maybe you are looking for the killer. You're a detective or something like that. You're always seeking knowledge in a community, in a group, in a real physical world. So Descartes is imagines himself to be in a very atypical environment. Um, so it's kind of like an artificial task of trying to show that there are other people and a world outside of his mind. So yeah, I mean, it appears, at least Cole is thinking that Descartes' dualism leads to a denigration of the body. And in one sense, I kind of go back and forth on what I think of this in terms of like whether Descartes himself was really thinking about this. This certainly may be implications in how his view has been received and passed on. Um, we certainly could say this, like the body is epistemically denigrated because it is less certain than the mind. The mind and the um, inner world of our thought and consciousness is where we find certainty. And for Descartes, that's epistemically, in terms of knowledge, that's thumbs up. Certainty is what we want. The body's not as certain. Thus, on epistemic grounds, we might say that the body has been denigrated. That's different from saying that it's morally denigrated or less valuable in human terms or anything like that. Though you can see how the one might lead to the other. So we also might say Descartes' views embody an already existing denigration of the body, that we get from Plato and Christianity and lots of things that were kind of already up and running. But she does think that his views have led to a denigration of the body. And as we'll see, that involves the denigration of woman once we get what I like to call the genderalization that associates woman with body and man with mind. Then we can say the denigration of the body is the denigration of woman, given that genderalization, a generalization about gender. Okay. It's interesting to think about whether or not that's really true. Maybe I'll kind of follow up on that a little bit later. So here we kind of get into this idea that had Descartes begun his thought with the relational self, and you can kind of look and see what that is. He never would have been able to express the radical doubt that is so characteristic and famously Cartesian that we see in Meditation 1 and finally answered in Meditation 2, doubts about whether there's even a physical world out there or whether you are like real people. And if we were in a real classroom, I could point to you and say like, I, on Cartesian grounds, can doubt whether you really exist, and you can doubt whether I really exist. But that wouldn't be possible if we began seeing the self that's entertaining these doubts as a relational entity, as constituted by its web of relations to its environment, including other people, as opposed to this kind of atomic thing that exists all on its own, independently of any other thing. Rather, if the self is constituted by the web of relations that it's in, which includes relations to an external physical environment and other people, then we couldn't doubt if they exist without doubting that we exist. So in order to know that you exist on the relational view of the self, you have to know that the things that you're related to exist because you are just those relations. So you couldn't doubt that you exist with, you couldn't believe that you exist without also believing that other things exist, because you are just a relation to these other things. You're not this kind of separate thing taken out of the many relations that you find yourself in. So it's actually a pretty interesting and complex view of the self here. But really the main point here is, had we started with that, Cole thinks that's the better view of the self, we wouldn't be able to get into this whole thing about Cartesian skepticism, and all of the radical doubts that he entertains would have been impossible. Okay. So the relational self here, as I've already kind of mentioned, is that the self is constituted by its relationships. That's different from the Cartesian soul or mind, which is just what it is independently of being related to any other minds or souls, or being related to a body, or being related to an external world. The Cartesian non-relational self exists separate from all of its relations. Cole wants to say that a more realistic view of the self is that it is constituted, it's made by, it just is the complex set of relationships that it's in. Okay, the concept of a radically isolated self is incoherent because the answer here seems to be that it's just this total abstraction from a reality in which people are never totally isolated. When are you ever isolated in the way that Descartes imagines himself to be in Meditation 1? We're always in relation to something. When to think is to think of something. To be is to be in relation to something. Descartes seems to deny all that he just is, but not in relation to anything. So Cole wants to say every moment at which we exist is to exist in relation to some other thing. And thus we are that complex set of relations. I took this question stem from the book editor. I wouldn't really say that shows that it's incoherent, but that it's false. Minor quibble. We'll go with the editor's question as it stands. Okay, I better get to this. Cole thinks that the relational self is more associated with the traits of masculinity than the Cartesian self. That's a nay. You can go and kind of check out why, but she thinks that maybe largely because of childbirth, that there's a kind of built-in connection to relations that go with femininity, and the kind of abstraction and separation is more with masculinity. You can go check that out a little bit more. The appearance obsession, which is probably more true now than ever, even more than when Cole was writing, more than when Descartes was writing, or at least it seems like that. It basically is connected to this idea that women are associated with the body and man associated with the mind. So you might wonder whether that's really true. Or if you were to kind of generalize men as kind of more dominated by the body or the mind, which would you say? What about women? More dominated by the mind or the body? These are generalizations, but Cole is definitely invoking some of those generalizations and showing how Descartes' dualism captures those in a way that is sexist. Okay, take it easy.